James Miller stared at his reflection in the polished metal wall of the Galactic Engineering Council chamber. His human face looked out of place among the various alien delegates filing in for the quarterly meeting. Some had scales that shifted colors with their moods. Others floated on anti-gravity discs. A few didn't even have physical bodies, appearing as shimmering energy fields contained in special environment suits. James straightened his plain gray uniform, the standard attire for Earth's Space Corps engineers. Next to the ornate garments and natural biological displays of the other species, it looked as basic as everything else humans brought to galactic society. "Delegate Miller, you seem to be blocking the entrance," came a cold, mechanical voice. James stepped aside quickly as Council Leader Vex moved past. The tall, four-armed alien didn't bother to look at him. None of them really did. In the 5 years since Earth had been granted a token seat on the Council, James had grown used to being ignored. "The human is still here," whispered a delegate from the Tor Collective loud enough for James to hear. "I thought they would have given up by now." The chamber filled quickly. 17 different species, all masters of technologies Earth scientists could barely understand. The Valerians with their crystal thinking matrices that could process quantum calculations instantly. The ancient Neth, who had been traveling between stars for 12,000 years. The Arcturians, whose massive ships could bend light itself. And then there was Earth, barely 2 centuries into spaceflight. The newcomers, the primitives. James took his seat at the far end of the oval table. As usual, the chair beside him remained empty. No one wanted to sit next to the human. "The Council recognizes all delegates," announced Leader Vex. "Today's primary agenda: the fuel crisis affecting outer rim colonies and proposals for next-generation propulsion systems." This was it, the opening James had been waiting for during 3 long years of silent meetings. He raised his hand, a human gesture that still confused some of the delegates. "The Council recognizes Earth Delegate Miller," Vex said, mechanical voice tinged with what might have been surprise. James stood, pulse quickening. "Distinguished Council members, Earth would like to present a propulsion concept for consideration." A ripple of what passed for laughter moved through the chamber. The Neth representative's color darkened to deep purple, their species equivalent of amusement. "Does Earth propose we return to chemical rockets?" asked Chief Engineer Thorne of the Arcturian Collective, his spiny ridge flexing with derision. More laughter. James activated his datapad. A hologram appeared above the table, his design for what he called the paradox drive. "Earth proposes a dimensional folding technique that would allow ships to create localized space-time pockets, effectively moving the vessel by folding space around it rather than moving through space itself." The laughter stopped. For a moment, the chamber was silent. Then, louder laughter erupted. "Dimensional folding." Thorne's voice boomed. "With Earth's level of technology. Impossible. The power requirements alone would. My calculations show it can be done with standard power cells." James interrupted, bringing up more diagrams. "The key isn't power. It's the geometrical configuration of ordinary materials to create resonance with the fabric of space-time." Professor Lux, the oldest member of the Council, fixed all 7 of her eyes on James. "Young human, do you understand that what you're proposing violates 3 fundamental laws of transdimensional physics?" "With respect, Professor, I believe those laws were formulated without considering certain properties of materials found on Earth." This caused even more commotion. The idea that backward Earth might possess anything unique was apparently hilarious to the advanced species. As the meeting devolved into technical arguments and thinly veiled insults about human intelligence, James noticed one delegate wasn't laughing. A Proximan engineer named Kira, known for her unconventional approaches. She was studying his diagrams with genuine interest. When the Council finally moved on to serious proposals, James gathered his rejected designs. He had expected this reaction. What he hadn't expected was Kira approaching him after the meeting. "Your theory has merit," she said quietly, her voice melodic and clear. The council dismisses it because they don't understand it. James looked up in surprise. You think it could work? Kira's silvery eyes met his. I think you're onto something that none of us considered. And I think you need someone who understands advanced engineering to help refine it. For the first time since joining the council, James felt a spark of hope. When can we start? He asked. Kira glanced around at the departing delegates, none of whom paid them any attention. They've already forgotten about you, she said with a small smile. That gives us the perfect cover to prove them all wrong. 2 weeks after their first meeting, James and Kira agreed to present his refined paradox drive designs to the full council. James spent days preparing his presentation, running simulations that showed the drive's potential. Kira had helped strengthen the mathematical models, but warned him the council would not be easily convinced. The main chamber is ready for your presentation, Earth Delegate, announced a mechanical assistant as James waited nervously in the antechamber. He clutched his data pad tightly, reviewing his notes one final time. When the doors opened, James found all 17 council members already seated. Unlike the previous meeting, every member was present. Word had spread about the amusing human proposal. Delegate Miller will now present his, what did you call it? Paradox drive. Leader Vex announced, the mechanical voice somehow conveying skepticism despite its flat tone. James stepped to the center of the room. A circular platform rose beneath him, lifting him so all could see. He took a deep breath and began. Distinguished council members, I present to you a new approach to faster-than-light travel that requires no exotic matter, no massive energy reserves, and can be built using materials available throughout the galaxy. He activated the holographic display. A 3-dimensional model of his drive appeared, spinning slowly to show all angles. The design was surprisingly simple, a series of interlocking rings surrounding a core that glowed soft blue. The paradox drive works by creating a dimensional fold around the vessel, James explained. Rather than pushing the ship through space, it brings the destination closer by folding space-time itself. Chief Engineer Thorne made a sound like grinding stones, the Arcturian version of a scoff. And how exactly does Earth propose to fold space-time? With human mathematics that barely understand 4 dimensions. Thorne's translator conveyed his words, but couldn't hide the contempt in his natural voice. James continued calmly. The key insight came from studying certain Earth materials that demonstrate unusual quantum properties when arranged in specific patterns. These create resonance with the underlying fabric of reality. Professor Lux raised 3 of her 7 appendages, signaling her desire to speak. Does the human understand that dimensional folding theories have been tested and rejected by the Neth 12,000 years ago? The energy requirements make such approaches impractical. This is basic knowledge taught to children. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. James displayed his power consumption diagrams. With respect, Professor, the Neth approach relied on brute force to bend space. Our approach uses resonance to find natural flex points in space-time. It's the difference between breaking a door down and finding the key. This analogy triggered what could only be described as alien laughter throughout the chamber. The Valerian delegate's crystalline structure actually chimed with amusement. The human thinks he has found a key that 17 spacefaring civilizations missed for millennia. Thorne announced to more laughter. Perhaps next he will tell us Earth has also solved immortality and perfect energy. James felt his face growing hot, but continued. The prototype is already built. Initial tests show. You've built this. Leader Vex interrupted, all 4 arms raised in alarm. Without council approval. It's a small-scale model, James clarified. Lab testing only. This is precisely why primitive species require supervision, said the Tor Collective representative. They meddle with forces they cannot comprehend. As the criticism mounted, James noticed Kira sitting silently, her expression unreadable. They had anticipated resistance, but not this level of dismissal. The Council appreciates Earth's enthusiasm, Leader Vex finally stated when the laughter subsided. But we must focus on practical solutions. The Arcturian quantum compression drive remains our best option, despite its exotic matter requirements. James stood his ground. At least allow a demonstration. One test flight. A test flight. Thorn's spines flared in alarm. Your device could tear a hole in spacetime, or more likely, simply fail and embarrass your species further. Professor Lux fixed her multiple eyes on James. Young human, I have calculated 17 distinct ways your design violates established physical laws. Your paradox drive is not merely impractical, it is impossible. The chamber erupted in fresh waves of alien sounds, all translating roughly to laughter or derision. As James gathered his rejected designs, one council member approached him. It wasn't Kira, but an ancient Neth scientist named Dorn, known for his conservative views. Human, Dorn said quietly, your persistence is admirable, but misguided. Some paths were abandoned for good reasons. Be careful you don't destroy yourself chasing impossibilities. Later, James found Kira waiting outside the chamber. Her silvery eyes showed concern. That was brutal, she said. James nodded grimly. But they're wrong, and we're going to prove it. Kira studied him for a moment. You're still willing to continue after that? More than ever, James said. They've shown me exactly what we're up against. Not physical laws, but the laws of prejudice and closed minds. For the first time, Kira smiled fully. Then let's build your impossible ship. The abandoned orbital facility orbiting Saturn's moon Titan wasn't much to look at. Once a research station for early interstellar studies, it had been forgotten after Earth joined the Galactic Council and gained access to alien technology. Now, its outdated equipment and isolation made it perfect for James and Kira's secret project. Hand me the molecular stabilizer, James said, his voice muffled as he worked inside a narrow access shaft. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the climate controls. They had been working 16-hour days for weeks. Kira passed him the tool, her silvery fingers more precise than any human hand. The power coupling is holding at 93% efficiency, better than we calculated. James slid out from the shaft and wiped his brow. Before them sat the heart of the paradox drive, smaller than most would expect. While conventional council drives filled massive engine rooms, their prototype was surprisingly compact, a series of concentric rings surrounding a pulsing blue core. It doesn't look like much, James admitted, studying their creation. That's its beauty, Kira replied. The council builds bigger, more powerful engines requiring exotic matter from dying stars. You looked at the problem differently. James nodded. Sometimes the simplest answer is the one everyone overlooks. Their partnership had grown stronger over the 3 months since the council meeting. James brought human intuition and unconventional thinking, while Kira contributed her species' advanced understanding of spatial mathematics. Together, they accomplished what neither could alone. Message incoming, announced the station's computer. Council security clearance. Priority level 1. They exchanged worried glances. A priority message meant high-level council business. Display message, Kira instructed. A holographic image of Leader Vex appeared, all 4 arms positioned in formal arrangement. Engineer Kira of Proxima Centauri. The council has noted your extended absence from official duties. Furthermore, unusual energy signatures have been detected near your registered location. You are hereby ordered to report to Central Authority within 7 standard days to account for your activities. Failure to comply will result in revocation of your engineering credentials. The message ended abruptly. They're getting suspicious, James said, running calculations in his head. 7 days isn't enough time to complete the final calibrations. Kira's silver skin took on a darker shade, a sign of determination in her species. Then we work faster. We're too close to stop now. We could also use help, James suggested. Someone we trust. Kira considered this. My former student, Tren. Brilliant mind. Trustworthy. But bringing others increases our risk. We're already at maximum risk, James pointed out. The Council won't just take our credentials if they discover what we're building. The penalty for unauthorized drive research was severe: permanent exile to primitive worlds. The Council controlled all faster-than-light technology because it controlled galactic power. I'll contact Tren, Kira decided, but we must move our timeline forward. If we're testing this drive, it needs to be soon. The next 5 days passed in a blur of activity. Tren arrived secretly, bringing valuable components and fresh energy. With 3 of them working around the clock, the Paradox drive quickly took final shape. On the 6th day, they installed the completed drive into a small shuttle, just large enough for 2 pilots and the necessary equipment to record test results. Power systems check complete, Tren reported, reviewing diagnostic screens. Dimensional stabilizers aligned. All systems nominal. James looked at the readouts, hardly believing they had done it. Tomorrow we test it. That night, as Tren slept, James found Kira staring out the viewport at distant stars. Having second thoughts, he asked. Not about the drive, she answered. It will work. I'm certain of that now. Then what? She turned to face him. About what comes after. The Council has maintained control of interstellar travel for thousands of years. Your drive threatens that control. James hadn't considered the political implications fully. We're just trying to solve a problem. Yes, Kira said softly, but solutions can be revolutionary without meaning to be. A sharp alert interrupted them. The station's proximity warning flashed red. Unidentified vessel approaching, the computer announced. Council registry. They rushed to the monitors. A sleek enforcement vessel was decelerating toward their station. They found us a day early, James said, feeling his stomach tighten. Kira's decision was immediate. We launch now. The drive is ready enough. But the final safety protocols. No time. She cut him off. If they confiscate our work, everything was for nothing. James knew she was right. As Tren joined them, awakened by the alarms, they moved with practiced efficiency to prepare for emergency departure. They're hailing us, Tren reported nervously. Ignore it, James said, powering up the shuttle. By the time they board the station, we'll be either dead or making history. Kira strapped herself into the co-pilot seat, preferably history. The shuttle's engines ignited, propelling them away from the station and toward the ultimate test of James's impossible theory. Council vessel is launching pursuit craft, Tren reported through the comm system. He had stayed behind on the station to monitor their telemetry and run interference. You have approximately 8 minutes before they're in range. Understood, James replied, his hands flying across the control panel. The shuttle shuddered as it pushed away from Saturn's gravity field. Status on the drive. Kira checked her instruments. Power flow stable. Dimensional rings are aligned. The core temperature is higher than predicted but within acceptable parameters. Through the viewport, the stars remained steady points of light against the black canvas of space. Soon those same stars would either witness history or their demise. We need to clear the solar system's gravimetric interference, James said, setting course for the heliopause. The shuttle accelerated smoothly, its conventional engines pushing to maximum capacity. On the sensor display, 3 blinking dots represented the Council enforcement vessels spreading out to cut off their escape routes. They're faster than us, Kira noted calmly. Conventional engines cannot outrun Council ships. James nodded grimly. We're not trying to outrun them. We just need enough distance to safely activate the drive. The minutes ticked by. The gap between their shuttle and the pursuers narrowed steadily. Warning messages flashed across their screens. The enforcement vessels were attempting to lock on with tractor beams. James, Kira said, her silver eyes fixed on her readouts. We need to make the attempt now. We won't clear the heliopause in time. He checked his calculations quickly. The solar gravity could destabilize the field. If we wait, we'll be captured, she countered. Better to risk the attempt. A message crackled through their comm system. Unidentified shuttle. This is Council enforcement. Power down your engines immediately, or we will disable your vessel. You have 30 seconds to comply." James looked at Kira. In her alien features, he saw the same determination he felt. Ready the drive. Diverting all non-essential power. The shuttle's lights dimmed as energy flowed to the paradox drive. The concentric rings began to spin, slowly at first, then faster until they became a blur. The blue core pulsed rhythmically, like a beating heart. "Field generators at maximum," Kira reported. Dimensional pocket forming. Outside, space itself seemed to ripple, as if viewed through heat waves rising from hot pavement. The stars began to smear, their light stretching in impossible ways. 20 seconds to tractor beam lock, came Tren's voice, tense but steady. James placed his hand on the activation switch. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. He thought of the council chamber, filled with laughter at his impossible theory. Activating paradox drive. Now. He pressed the switch. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the shuttle lurched as if caught by a giant hand. The viewports filled with swirling blue light. James felt a strange sensation, as if his body was both compressed and stretched simultaneously. Kira's voice came as if from far away. Field stability at 60%, 70%, holding at 75%. The sensation intensified. James fought to keep his focus on the instruments. According to their theory, they were creating a dimensional pocket, folding space around the shuttle rather than moving through it. 15 seconds to complete fold, Kira announced, her voice strained. The blue light outside grew brighter. Warning alarms blared as systems throughout the shuttle registered impossible readings. Power fluctuation in the core. Kira shouted above the noise. Containment at 90% and falling. James made a quick adjustment, rerouting emergency power. Stabilizing. For one terrifying moment, the blue light flickered. Then it surged back, stronger than before. The shuttle vibrated so violently that James feared it might tear apart. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The blue light vanished. The vibrations ceased. The alarms fell silent. Through the viewport, unfamiliar stars shone against the void. "Drive status?" James asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kira checked her instruments, then checked them again. Nominal. Power levels returning to baseline. She looked up at him, her silver eyes wide. "James, we did it." He ran a quick position check using stellar cartography. The result made him double-check his calculations. "According to these readings," he said slowly, "we've traveled 16 light-years in 11 seconds. Impossible." Kira breathed, but her tone held wonder, not doubt. "The council ships?" James asked. "No sign of pursuit. We've left them literally light-years behind." A message crackled through their comm system. Tren's voice filled with excitement. "Did it work?" "The sensors showed you simply. Vanished." James exchanged a look with Kira, a smile spreading across his face. "It worked, Tren. The paradox drive works." As the full implications hit him, James gazed out at the alien stars surrounding them. The human who had been dismissed as primitive had just revolutionized space travel forever. The Grand Council chamber had never been so packed. Representatives from all 17 member species crowded the tiered seating, while dozens more observers stood along the walls. News of the human folding drive had spread through the galactic community like wildfire after James and Kira had made their dramatic entrance. "Order. The Council will have order." Leader Vex's mechanical voice carried over the commotion, all four arms raised for emphasis. The chamber gradually quieted. At the center of the room, James and Kira stood calmly beside their shuttle. They had flown directly to the Council headquarters on Proxima Centauri B, arriving mere hours after Tren had transmitted news of their successful test. What should have been a journey of weeks had taken less than a day. "The Council recognizes Earth Delegate Miller and Engineer Kira of Proxima," Leader Vex announced formally. You stand accused of unauthorized propulsion experiments, defying council orders, and evading enforcement vessels. How do you respond? Before James could speak, Chief Engineer Thorne burst forward. This is clearly a hoax. There is no possible way they traveled 16 light-years in seconds. Our sensors would have detected such a massive energy release. James stepped forward. That's the point, Chief Engineer. Our drive doesn't use massive energy. It creates a dimensional fold that requires minimal power compared to conventional drives. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Not laughter this time, but uncertainty. Professor Lux floated down from her seat. I demand a technical inspection of this vessel immediately. We welcome it, Kira replied. In fact, we insist on it. 4 hours later, the chamber reconvened. The Council's most respected technical experts had examined the shuttle thoroughly. Their findings had created chaos among the delegates. The chief inspector, a Valerian whose crystalline body flashed with confused patterns, delivered the report. The drive functions exactly as Delegate Miller claimed, he stated, his voice conveying clear disbelief. It creates a dimensional pocket that effectively folds space around the vessel. The energy requirements are 1/8 of our standard drives, and it requires no exotic materials. The chamber erupted. Some delegates shouted questions, others demanded to see the data themselves. A few simply sat in stunned silence. Impossible. Thorne shouted above the noise. The fundamental laws of transdimensional physics clearly state. That we were wrong, interrupted Professor Lux, surprising everyone. All 7 of her eyes were fixed on the shuttle. The evidence is undeniable. This human has discovered something we overlooked. James felt a moment of vindication, but it was short-lived. Leader Vex stepped forward, posture rigid. While the achievement is noteworthy, Vex stated coldly, the method remains problematic. This technology was developed without council oversight, tested without safety protocols, and represents a potential threat to established order. The true concern became clear as Thorne added, this drive must be placed under immediate council control. For safety reasons, of course. James had anticipated this reaction. The council didn't just regulate technology. They controlled it, maintaining their power by keeping advanced systems in the hands of established species. With respect, James replied, Earth intends to share this technology, not surrender it. This caused even more commotion. Sharing advanced propulsion designs freely was unheard of in council space. Unacceptable, Thorne declared. This human doesn't understand the dangers. If every primitive species gained access to such technology, chaos would ensue. Kira stepped forward. Is that your concern, Chief Engineer? Safety? Or is it that the paradox drive makes your fleet of expensive ships obsolete overnight? A tense silence fell over the chamber. She had named the unspoken truth, the economic and political upheaval this technology would cause. Leader Vex's voice was cold when he spoke again. The Council will vote to invoke emergency containment protocols. This technology will be placed under Council restriction until proper assessment is complete. Several delegates nodded in agreement, particularly those from older, more established species. But James noticed something interesting. Representatives from younger council members looked uncertain, even resistant. The Syrian delegate, from a species that had joined the council only a century before Earth, rose suddenly. Before we vote, she said, her melodic voice carrying clearly, I wish to hear what Earth proposes to do with this technology. All eyes turned to James. This was the moment he had prepared for. The complete specifications for the Paradox Drive have already been transmitted to every member world, he said calmly. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Even Kira looked surprised. This hadn't been part of their plan. You did what? Leader Vex demanded, synthetic voice rising in pitch. Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded, James continued steadily. Earth believes progress belongs to everyone, not just those in power. The drive designs are simple enough that any world with basic industrial capacity can build one. As the implications sank in, James watched the council members' reactions. Some were outrage, others calculating, and a surprising number, especially from younger species, seemed relieved, even excited. The balance of power had shifted, and it had taken a primitive human to do it. The emergency session of the Galactic Council stretched into its third hour. What had begun as controlled debate had devolved into something approaching chaos, at least by the usually ordered standards of council proceedings. This is an unprecedented breach of council authority. Thorn thundered, his spiny ridge fully extended in anger. The human has violated at least 7 major protocols regarding technology distribution. Leader Vex struggled to maintain order as delegates spoke over one another. The chamber had divided itself physically, with elder species gathering on one side and younger council members on the other. The division was striking and unprecedented. "Point of order," called the Syrian representative, her voice cutting through the noise. "The human delegation has the right to defend its actions before any penalty vote." James stood calmly at the center of the storm. Beside him, Kira remained equally composed, though her silver skin had darkened with tension. "Delegate Miller," Leader Vex acknowledged reluctantly, "you may speak." James stepped forward. The chamber quieted, all eyes and sensory organs fixed on him. "Distinguished council members," he began, "I understand your concern. For millennia, the council has controlled the pace of technological advancement. You've decided which species gets access to what technology, when they get it, and how they use it." He paused, looking around the chamber. "You call it stability. From where Earth stands, it looks like control." Angry murmurs rose from the elder species section. The Neth representative's color darkened to deep purple. "The human accuses us of oppression," Professor Lux stated, "when we have maintained peace for 12,000 years. Peace for whom?" James countered. "While core worlds enjoy abundance, outer colonies struggle with outdated technology. Some worlds wait centuries for advancements the Council deems them ready for." The Syrian representative nodded openly, along with delegates from 3 other relatively young species. Chief Engineer Thorn moved to the center of the chamber, facing James directly. The Arcturian towered over him, spines flexing with barely controlled rage. "You speak of sharing, human, but you've created dangerous instability. Without proper protocols, untested drives could tear holes in space-time. Without proper controls, primitive species could reach worlds they're not prepared to interact with. Or perhaps," James replied evenly, "they could solve their own problems without waiting for council permission." The younger species delegates began tapping their stations in approval, the council equivalent of applause. Leader Vex raised all 4 arms for silence. "This discussion is irrelevant. The technology has been compromised. We must now determine the appropriate response." A holographic display appeared, showing council emergency powers. The text highlighted a specific protocol: Enforcement Option 3, Containment and Reclamation. James recognized it immediately. The Council was proposing to dispatch enforcement fleets to confiscate all Paradox drive specifications and prototypes throughout Council space. Kira stepped forward. "You cannot suppress this technology. It's too simple, too efficient. People will build it whether you approve or not." "We have dealt with unauthorized technology before," Leader Vex stated coldly. "Our methods are effective." The implied threat hung in the air. Throughout history, worlds that defied council technology restrictions had faced severe consequences: trade embargoes, isolation, even military intervention. James felt the weight of the moment. This was larger than his drive now. This was about the future of galactic society itself. "Before you vote," he said, "consider this. Earth is not asking permission. Neither are the dozens of worlds already building their own paradox drives. We're offering partnership." He gestured toward the younger species delegates. "Many in this chamber have waited generations for the technology the elder species take for granted. Some have developed their own innovations, only to see them restricted or controlled. The paradox drive is just the beginning." The Syrian representative stood. Sirius supports Earth's position. The time for technological gatekeeping has passed. One by one, representatives from younger species rose in support. Even some middle-tier species, traditionally aligned with the Council leadership, seemed hesitant to oppose them. Thorne's voice cut through the growing rebellion. This is exactly why restrictions exist. The human has turned Council members against each other in mere hours. Leader Vex, I move to invoke Emergency Protocol 7. A hush fell over the chamber. Emergency Protocol 7 authorized direct military action to preserve Council stability. James met Thorne's gaze steadily. Is that your solution? Force. Violence against Council members who disagree with you. That would only prove our point. Leader Vex studied the divided chamber carefully. For the first time, the mechanical voice carried uncertainty. This council has maintained order for 12 millennia through consensus, not force, Vex stated. We will not begin now. Thorne's spines flattened in shock. Leader Vex, you cannot allow this rebellion. It is not rebellion to seek progress, Vex replied. Perhaps the human is correct that our methods have grown too restrictive. James could hardly believe what he was hearing. The leader of the Galactic Council was actually considering compromise. I propose a transition committee, James suggested, with equal representation from all Council species, not to restrict the paradox drive, but to help manage its integration safely. As murmurs of agreement spread through the chamber, James realized that the real breakthrough wasn't the paradox drive at all. It was the beginning of a new kind of council. 5 years had passed since the day James Miller changed galactic history. Standing on the observation deck of the _Horizon _, Earth's first deep space exploration vessel, he watched as ships from 12 different worlds moved into formation against the backdrop of stars. The _Horizon _ itself was a marvel of collaboration. Its hull featured Arcturian metals, its life support systems were based on Neth biosphere technology, and at its heart pulsed an advanced paradox drive, the 5th generation since James's original prototype. Fleet alignment complete, Chief Engineer, reported the communications officer. All vessels report ready for synchronized jump. James nodded. Thank them for confirmation. Jump sequence will begin in 20 minutes. Around him, the bridge buzzed with activity. The crew was a mix of humans and aliens, all wearing the same dark blue uniforms with the mission patch, a stylized image of the Andromeda Galaxy with the words First Contact Initiative beneath it. The door to the bridge slid open, and Kira entered. After 5 years working together, James could read her silvery features almost as well as a human face. Today, she practically glowed with excitement. The ambassador delegation is ready, she reported, though the Valerian representative is still complaining about the journey duration. James smiled. 12 hours to Andromeda is too long. Apparently, Kira replied with a small laugh. I reminded him that before the paradox drive, it would have taken several human lifetimes. Their eyes turned to the view screen, where ships of various designs hovered in formation. 5 years ago, most of these species barely acknowledged each other. Now they were partners in the most ambitious expedition in galactic history. Message from Council Station, the communications officer announced. Leader Vex wishes to address the fleet before departure. The main screen flickered, and the image of Leader Vex appeared. Though still mechanical in appearance, the Council leader had undergone subtle changes in recent years, more expressive movements, less rigid posture. Representatives of the Joint Exploration Fleet, Vex began, today marks the culmination of what many once thought impossible, not merely the technology that will carry you to another galaxy, but the cooperation that made it possible. James listened with a sense of pride. The transition had not been easy. The elder species had resisted change at every turn. Thorne had actually resigned from the Council in protest. But gradually, a new balance had emerged. When you reach Andromeda, Vex continued, you will represent not individual worlds but our collective civilization. The Council has existed for 12,000 years, But only now are we truly beginning to understand what galactic community means. As the speech concluded, Kira moved to stand beside James at the viewport. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked quietly. "That day in the council chamber when everyone was laughing at your designs?" James shook his head. "Honestly, I just wanted to prove the drive would work. Everything else." He gestured at the fleet assembled before them. "This was beyond my imagination." Professor Lux approached them, her movement smoother in the custom gravity harness designed by human engineers. After initially opposing the paradox drive, she had become one of its strongest advocates, helping to refine the technology. "We are ready to begin final calculations," she said, all 7 eyes blinking with what James had learned was excitement. "The synchronized jump of 14 vessels will be another historic achievement." "Thank you, Professor," James replied. "Your team's work on fleet coordination has been invaluable." As Lux returned to her station, Kira spoke softly. "She still can't quite admit that a human came up with the original breakthrough." "It doesn't matter," James said. "The best ideas come from collaboration now, not individual species." The observation deck filled with crew members coming to witness the historic moment. Among them was Tren, now a senior engineer in his own right. Nearby stood representatives from worlds that 5 years ago would never have been granted access to advanced propulsion technology. 10 minutes to jump sequence," announced the ship's computer. James looked out at the distant stars. Somewhere among them was Andromeda Galaxy, 2.5 million light-years away, a distance once considered an insurmountable barrier, now reduced to a half-day journey. "Chief Engineer," called out the navigation officer, "final course verification complete. The fleet is ready at your command." James turned to face the crew. Faces human and alien looked back at him with the same expression of anticipation and wonder. 5 years of working together had taught them all that differences in biology meant little compared to shared purpose. "Send the signal to the fleet," he ordered. "Prepare for synchronized jump." As the countdown began, James thought about how completely everything had changed. The council that once dismissed Earth as primitive now sought human insight. Species that had hoarded knowledge now shared it freely, and the technology that had once seemed impossible was now routine. "Jump sequence initiating," reported the helm officer. The stars outside began to shimmer as 14 paradox drives activated simultaneously. The blue glow of dimensional folding surrounded each ship in the fleet. As space itself bent around them, James reflected on the true lesson of the past 5 years. Sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all.